Lady Lucinda Pembroke pulled the hood of her grey mantle around her face and hurried down the nearly empty halls of the art gallery ahead of the morning crowd. She didn't halt until she reached a full-length portrait of a laughing gentleman on a galloping white stallion. Not precisely a gentleman, she supposed, trying to be honest with herself. Romantic fantasies needn't be gentlemen. Looking up, she fell under the spell of the subject's mysterious dark eyes all over again. It was as if he looked just at her, and that they shared a wonderful secret. She'd painted the portrait, so she knew its secret. The dashing gentleman didn't exist anywhere except in her imagination. But that wasn't how rumour had it. With a sigh, she admired the gentleman's exotically dark complexion, rakish smile and unsettling eyes. She loved the contrast between his scarred, piratical features and his elegant clothes. She'd deliberately given him a romantic white stallion and painted the innocent background of a family fair to contrast with his aura of danger. Amazingly, the playful setting seemed to suit him. The man didn't exist. If he had, she would never have embarrassed herself and the subject by entering the oil in the exhibition. She had even signed the painting with just her initials to avoid any potential harm, except that there were enough people familiar with her style to set rumour rolling. She would never understand why people saw more in her art than she intended. She couldn't imagine why the Earl of Lansdowne would want to ruin her triumph and this magnificent painting with his scandalous accusation. If he hadn't suffered an apoplexy immediately after seeing the portrait and making his furious allegations, she would demand an apology. She would never paint a murderer. The sound of footsteps warned her that the first arrivals of the gallery were approaching the back hall more quickly than she'd expected, probably heading directly for the scandal of the moment rather than examining the better-known works in the front hall. She had no intention of making a spectacle of herself by appearing in public with the portrait. Looking around, she located a small niche across the hall where she could sit unobserved. Her fingers itched for the sketchbook and pencil in her pocket. She'd like to have a drawing of the exhibition for posterity. After this episode, her father wasn't likely to let her enter another oil, and she couldn't blame him. She'd never meant to achieve notoriety. She'd only wanted others to admire the portrait into which she had poured her heart and soul. She peered around the corner of the niche as a tall man strode determinedly in her direction, the skirt of his elegant coat rippling about his legs with the strength of his stride. His coat was tailored to fit shoulders and a chest wider than that of most gentlemen. The lapels and cut were of precisely this year's fashion, except that the coat was black. No gentleman wore black in London, not even for mourning. How very odd. His neckcloth was a pristine white with just the right amount of starch for crispness without an inch of foppery. His breeches were of a tawny silk that matched the elaborate embroidery on the coat's lapels and pockets. His long vest matched his breeches and was embroidered with black in a simplicity that caused her to sigh in admiration. More gentlemen should accent their masculinity in this way instead of dressing as peacocks. But when he was close enough for her to see his face, she gasped in horror and drew back as far into the niche as she could go. Crossing his arms over his new, correctly tailored and damned expensive clothes, Sir Trevelyan Rochester studied the ridiculous portrait hanging in the Royal Art Gallery for the entire world to see. Fury bubbled at the outrage perpetrated on a perfectly respectable piece of canvas that would have been better used in making sails. He dropped his gaze to the artist's signature, L.M.P., and his ire flared anew. The coward hid behind the initials. He'd spent 20 years working his way up from impressed sailor to owner of his own ship, and not one man in those 20 years had dared to insult him in such a flagrant manner, and lived to tell about it anyway. He'd defeated bloodthirsty pirates, captured French privateers, gained his own letter of marque from the King of England himself, only to be humiliated by an unknown artist on the other side of the world who could not possibly know more than rumours of his exploits. Had it not been for his desire for peace and a home of his own, rather than preparing for yet another senseless war with France over the colonies,